Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined on this Thursday morning by Derek Brown and by Andrew Erickson. And fellas, as always, we are talking about some must-sits. We are already here into Week 9. We're into the second half of the season for some teams, for most teams. Guys, let's start where we always do with the must-sit running backs. And Erickson, we will start with you.
Yeah, so going back to Gus Edwards here, we talked about starting him last week. That came through, 3 touchdowns. It was a great matchup against the Cardinals. Not the case here. They're playing at home, but they're playing against the Seattle Seahawks, who have a very fierce run defense, and they just added Leonard Williams, who was one of the best run defenders for the New York Giants before the trade deadline. So for me, Gus Edwards is a very matchup-dependent running back. Like, you play him in spots where you can see the Ravens running away with the game against bad run defenses like it was last week. I don't necessarily anticipate that being the case here against the Seattle Seahawks. 3.2 yards per carry allowed this season, 5th fewest rushing yards allowed per game, 3.1 yards per carry allowed to just running backs. So for me, Gus Edwards is a boom or bust kind of guy. If he falls in the end zone, like, you're going to feel great about it. But the fact that he scored 3 touchdowns last week has me kind of leaning towards, all right, I don't think he's going to find the end zone again after scoring so many touchdowns just last week. So Gus Edwards is going to be a sit for me in Week 9.
We're going to hit on some other players from this matchup later on in the show, but I am curious, do you think this is going to be a high-scoring or a low-scoring game? Because it's two really talented offenses with a lot of pieces, but it's also two defenses that have been playing at a pretty elite level for at least the last month, if not longer, for the Ravens. So Erickson, do you expect this to be a high-scoring matchup or kind of more low-scoring?
So when I wrote this game up in the Betting Pros primer, which gets released every Friday morning, I went in thinking, all right, Ravens are a typical under team. That's usually you want to bet the under when the Ravens play, but the Ravens are also a team that plays up to their competition. Last week we saw with the Cardinals, like, they're playing the bad Cardinals team. They let them hang around. They don't put them out of the game. And then the Ravens didn't even cover because the Cardinals were able to score in garbage time late with Trey McBride. So I think it actually has some, recipe of a sneaky shootout. Again, you look at the defensive, it's like, all right, well, who have they played? Now, the one way that it doesn't go over is you see the same result that happened in the Lions game, where the Seahawks just do nothing on offense. Like, that's totally possible. But I do like the Ravens offense overall. I like Lamar a lot in this particular matchup. I don't necessarily really care about how good the Seahawks defense has been over the last couple of weeks because they haven't really played a lot of great quarterbacks outside of Joe Burrow, who is still coming back off of the injury. So I do think there is a chance that this game does shoot out, which is very different from what you typically see from Ravens when they're heavy favorites, especially at home.
Let's move to the next player here. DBro, who's your top must-sit running back?
It's got to be Rhamondre Stevenson. I give up. I wave the white flag. I give up. I have lost hope for Rhamondre Stevenson this season. It's happened, guys. He's not breaking tackles. He's not doing much of anything with the touches that he's given. He's getting 15.2 touches per game. What has he done with that? 60 total yards. And most of the touchdowns get vultured by Ezekiel Elliott. It's been a great time to have Rhamondre Stevenson on your fantasy rosters. And I say this all with the caveat that I understand the Commanders traded away most of their defensive line. So probably all the run defense stats where they've been a good run defense, we could just toss those out the window because no Chase Young, no Montez Sweat. Obviously, that's going to change things. But well, we're talking about a guy that out of 65 qualifying running backs, he's 55th in explosive run rate. He's 50th in missed tackles forced per attempt. Oh, and look at that. He's 62nd out of 65 running backs in yards after contact per attempt. They might not even field a defensive line. They could drop everybody back in coverage. And I don't even know if Rhamondre Stevenson can get more than 4 yards per carry. So sit him. Sit him. Sit him.
Yeah, Erickson, are you kind of also waving the white flag on Rhamondre? Because he's gotten a lot of love for most of the season from both of you guys. But here we are again, halfway through the year. And at a certain point, is it just time to say, this was a miss?
I mean, I hate to come on here and say, oh, well, he's been so good. We were right about Rhamondre. But at the same time, the schedule's been so bad for the Patriots. Like, they're always behind in games. And DBro is specifically pointing out all of the lack of rushing for Rhamondre, but you didn't mention the receiving that has been actually on the uptick the last couple of weeks. He had 6 catches.
It's the only thing keeping him alive, though,
but that's what I'm
Erickson.
saying. But that still matters. Like, you can't say, oh, well, he's a 0 in the passing game, because he's not. Like, he still does catch passes, and that adds value in fantasy football. He has multiple catches in his last 3 games. He has more than 5 catches in 2 of his last 3 games. Like, and that still matters. And look, from someone that watches every single Patriots game, like, he doesn't look bad when he's out in space. Like, he still breaks tackles when he's out in space. It's just when he's in between the tackles is when he's getting stuffed most of the time, because the Patriots offensive line has been injured. So, look, right now, like, DBro's right about how he's basically hit rock bottom, which is why I think that he's like an interesting buy low, because the Patriots schedule is much easier. Like, and nobody wants him. So at the end of the day, like, we know Rhamondre is a good running back. Just like we know Tony Pollard's a good running back. Like, Pollard was a guy I thought was like screaming buy low running back this week. It's like, look, unless he just totally just forgot how to be good at football, which I don't think that he did. I think the same thing with Rhamondre. Nobody wants him right now. So I get if you don't want to start him, that's fine. But in a game where the Patriots are favored to win, which doesn't happen very frequently, I mean, I think that he can still be an RB2.
I think the
Quickly,
matchups have
DBro, where's
helped
he
him a
rest of
lot.
season for you?
Oh,
Say that again? Oh.
I think.
DBro,
Go ahead, buddy.
I was just asking rest of season.
Where is he at rest of the season? He's probably going to be somewhere in the low end RB2 category. Let me see where I've got Rhamondre. I've got him at RB24. I mean, he's hugged up right next to Rachaad White, Aaron Jones. I mean, really, it's just a category of running backs where I don't want much to do with. And for as far as Rhamondre, I think that if you look over the last 3 weeks, I think he was greatly helped because they faced the Raiders and the Buffalo Bills, who are arguably bottom 5 run defense. Now, maybe the Commanders enter that conversation, and, you know, with them trading away their entire defensive line, they say, hey, that bottom 5 table, welcome us, get us a seat there. But outside of that, it's difficult to have any faith in him this week.
Erickson, give me your next must-sit running back.
So this was another guy. I'm basically like just running back all the guys I talked about to start last week. This one didn't go as well. Dameon Pierce, even though he got stuffed at the goal line, he had a touchdown called back. So he would have bailed us out with the touchdown, but he did not score. Instead, it was Beck, the fullback, and CJ Stroud rushing a touchdown in. So Dameon Pierce ran very poorly last week in the smash spot against the Carolina Panthers. Much tougher matchup this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're one of 2 defenses this year that has not allowed a rushing touchdown to a running back. Now that could be, they're regressing, it's going to happen eventually. Well, considering how bad Dameon Pierce has been, especially when it comes to just like scoring touchdowns, like I'm not optimistic that he's going to be able to find pay dirt in this particular matchup. And the fact that out of the bye week, Devin Singletary was basically still heavily involved like we saw before, which I wasn't sure that was going to carry over the usage. You know, Pierce only played 2 more snaps than Devin Singletary in a pretty close back and forth game against the Carolina Panthers. So Dameon Pierce is, he's a committee back right now. If the game gets out of hand where the Texans are trailing in points, expect Pierce to really be involved whatsoever. Like, he's not even involved in the passing game. So you talked about Rhamondre as a sit player. I mean, I would rather sit Dameon Pierce because he doesn't catch passes at all. And I don't know what his touchdown equity is going to be in a matchup against a tough Buccaneers defensive front. So Dameon Pierce for me is someone that I really feel like you can just kind of sit and you don't really need to worry about him burning you in any capacity.
And he's got an ankle injury, so if he's going to be limited at all, Devin Singletary could outsnap him this week.
DBro, I was going to ask sort of the same thing I posed to Erickson, where we're halfway through the season. Is it time to just say, like, Pierce was kind of officially a miss this year? I mean, he's only topped 60 yards twice. He's only topped 50 yards twice. He got 66 in one game. He got 81 in another. Other than that, 46 and then a whole bunch of games in the 30s. Just hasn't been there.
It hasn't been there, and the problem for Dameon Pierce is the offensive line has been terrible. They have been injured. They're not blocking well. And, I mean, you could look at both his and Devin Singletary's tackle breaking metrics, and as far as missed tackles forced per attempt, they've been great, both of them. They're both top 20, top 24 amongst running backs, which they're breaking tackles. But it's hard to do anything when you're getting contacted behind the line of scrimmage as soon as you get the ball in your hands. 1 yard. Like, you look at yards before contact per attempt, Houston is abysmal. So while they might be able to keep CJ Stroud clean in the pocket, they have been terrible with a capital T as far as run blocking this year. So yes, wave the white flag.
If you need new tires for your car, Discount Tire is your go-to. They have exceptional service, and you get a 30% shorter average wait time when you buy and book online at discounttire.com. They have this really cool feature called Treadwell, which is an online tire buying guide that gives you transparency on tire performance, as well as personalized recommendations based on your location and driving habits. Discount Tire is also the largest independent tire retailer in the country, so it has the biggest selection of tires and wheels. And here's a pro tip from the experts at Discount Tire. You can prevent wear and boost gas mileage by keeping your tires properly inflated. Tire pressure supports the weight of your vehicle and is important to check for safety. So if it's been over a month since you last checked your tire pressure, stop by one of their local stores for a free tire safety and air pressure check. Discount Tire, let's get you taken care of. DBro, give me your next must-sit running back.
Well, I understand that a lot of people are going to have to start him this week, and I get it because of buys and things, but Rachaad White, temper your expectations. And I'm going to say this with a caveat that, yes, I understand that over the last, talk about how Erickson was talking about Rhamondre and the receiving has absolutely bailed Rachaad White out. He's got 135 receiving yards over the last 2 games. So I understand that. Get it. But if you look at this matchup versus Houston, I think this is a big day for Baker Mayfield and these wide receivers, especially Mike Evans, because they have been giving it up to the deep ball. So in a game script where I don't know that the Buccaneers are going to be losing this game, much as are we going to get 50 freaking checkdowns to Rachaad White at the end of the game to save his day. If you look at how the Texans have been as a run defense, they've been pretty good. 8th lowest explosive run rate, 2nd lowest yards per carry allowed to zone runs, which Rachaad White, 56% of his carries have been on zone runs. So in the rushing department, I think he's going to be a 0 this week. And as far as the checkdowns, I just don't know that the receiving volume is going to be there for him, even though the Texans have given it up to receiving backs. I think this is a big game for Baker Mayfield, and he's going to throw deep, and I think it's a big game for Mike Evans. And if they're in positive game scripts, we're not going to need the 50 checkdowns to Rachaad White, so he could disappoint people.
Yeah, his ranking in ECR is RB15, a high-end RB2, but I think to your point, that is a lot of running backs on bye or,
weeks.
Still obviously injuries. I don't think that's really reflective of the confidence most people would have in White. It's just who else are you going to put there? So let's go to the next player here. Erickson, who's your final must-sit running back?
Roschon Johnson. So he came back last week for the Chicago Bears, but the Bears are, trotting out this 3-headed running back by committee. That's really gross. Each guy's basically playing a third of the snaps. Foreman's usually the guy leading in carries. Darrington Evans is the other. I couldn't even remember the other running back they have. Darrington Evans was the one that scored the touchdown last week. So it's just a ugly committee on a Bears offense that it's we can't get a lot of fantasy production unless we're really getting all the touches for one guy. So although I think Roschon is still the guy to own, I've seen him get dropped in a bunch of leagues, I would have him on my bench because if anyone's going to emerge, it would probably be him at this point as the Bears kind of look ahead to the future to kind of evaluate a guy they really liked preseason before he got hurt. So I like stashing Roschon for some better matchups down the line to see if his usage increases. But just based on what we've seen so far, 3-headed committee and the Saints, 4th fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs this season, just not a good matchup. If it was a better matchup, maybe I could make the case for starting Roschon. But in a bad matchup like this, I really would rather look elsewhere.
DBro, you're even lower on Roschon than Erickson is in the rankings.
It's because exactly what Erickson talked about. It's a 3-headed committee. I was really high on Roschon in the rankings last week because I was like, okay, well, yeah, Foreman gets the early down work. Not a great matchup versus the Chargers as far as rushing goes. But hey, receiving backs, baby, let's go. And then the Bears were like, but we must get routes for Darrington Evans, right? We must get red zone touches for Darrington Evans, right? Darrington Evans, Roschon still led this backfield in routes run last week. But Darrington Evans walked away with the most red zone touches. What are we doing here? A 3-headed backfield? And there are multiple teams in the NFL that are doing this right now. Does that seem to work? Does it ever work out well for your offense when you split the work up into 3 ways? Did it work out well for the Cardinals? No. The Bears? No. So, no, I do not want anything. I'm with Erickson. I don't want anything to do with Roschon this week.
Let's stick with you, DBro, for your last must-sit running back.
Well, speaking of a guy that was in a 3-way backfield, but has been condensed back down to 2, and it still doesn't matter. Brian Robinson. Don't want anything to do with that man. Do not start him. you're looking at this matchup this week. Look, I talked about the other side of this. Run defense that's allowing the 6th lowest explosive run rate, highest stuff rate. I am not starting Brian Robinson. This easily could be a matchup where we see more Antonio Gibson, depending on how the game script goes. So versus Patriots, I mean, they've been stopping everything on the ground. So no, sit Brian Robinson.
Let's check out the Who Do I Start tool. This is free to use at fantasypros.com/start. Anybody can head there and put in your own starter sit questions up to 4 players at a time, which is a feature I quite like. You can even pick and choose which experts your decision draws from. Again, this is free to use at fantasypros.com/start. So Erickson, I will throw a couple of these options your way. Are you starting Gus Edwards or Chuba Hubbard this week?
I would start Chuba Hubbard.
How about Dameon Pierce or Emari Demercado?
So, yeah, Emari Demercado is a interesting guy because they've used him in a different way every single week. So, I don't know what is, one week it's he doesn't play at all. The next week he plays 80% of the snaps. The next week he does something different. So, he's a total wild card, just in terms of, what his role is going to be and the fact that Clayton Tune's going to start and they're playing the Browns. At least I feel more confident about what Pierce can do and what his role is on the offense. So unless it's a full PPR, I think I'd probably still with Demercado, but half PPR standard. I think I'm just gonna roll with Dameon Pierce and just pray that he falls in the end zone because I don't even know if Demercado is gonna have a chance to score or is even the red zone back for the Cardinals at this point. So I'm hedging.
Who do you like in that one, DBro? Dameon Pierce or Demercado?
I'm going to go Demercado, and this is assuming that he plays. I know he's got the toe injury and stuff, missed practice on Wednesday. So with the assumption that he plays, I'm handling for Demercado. The matchup is fantastic for him this week.
Worth mentioning, since we already moved past him, Gus Edwards also on the injury report on Wednesday. I haven't seen anything that makes me think he's not going to be ready to go for Sunday, though. And then lastly, Erickson, Roschon Johnson or Deontay Foreman. Just a couple of Bears running backs. Who do you like?
I mean, I'm going to stay with Roschon. I think he's still the running back. If you have to start a Bears running back, he would be the guy that I would play.
DBro, how about Rhamondre Stevenson or Aaron Jones this week?
I'll go Aaron Jones, the matchup plus the talent. We saw Aaron Jones play his highest snap percentage of the season. Now, he didn't do a lot with the work, but I would handily take Aaron Jones and just say, you know what? Hope the talent, the explosiveness is somewhere in there. Don't think it's there for Rhamondre this year.
Rachaad White or the aforementioned Gus Edwards?
I'm going to go with Rachaad White. That matchup for Gus Edwards is terrible versus Seattle.
Now, how about Brian Robinson or Zach Moss this week?
Oh, Zach Moss. I have Zach Moss. I'm probably going to have, I've got Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor as both top 24 running backs. I mean, really considering how terrible, and it gets nasty, really fast. Once you get going down the ranks, you get past RB 13 or 14, 15, you're like, ugh. So we're just going to lean a little bit extra into this beautiful matchup versus the Panthers for Zach Moss.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the must-sit wide receivers. Erickson, starting with you.
I'm going to sit Terry McLaurin for the Commanders. I really don't like this spot a lot for Washington heading on the road to play the Patriots. I know their defense has given up a lot of points the last couple of weeks, but it's been against some of these more elite passers between Josh Allen and Tua. So for me, I think this is a down spot for the Commanders' passing offense potentially, and the fact that the Patriots have been so good about taking away number one wide receivers like Terry McLaurin, who is the number one on his team. They're number one in DVOA versus number one wide receivers. So I think they're going to throw everything at McLaurin and force Sam Howell to throw to other players, which for most of the season he's been fine doing. Before the last 2 weeks, we've seen McLaurin's target share hover under 17%, where he's not seeing more targets than Dotson or Curtis Samuel or some of these other guys, Logan Thomas. So if they're going to spread the wealth, I think McLaurin could have a down game in terms of targets, and I'm not so sure how efficient he's going to be with Sam Howell. So I'm going to sit Terry McLaurin.
DBro, who's your first must-sit receiver?
Well, I'm going to bring up Gabe Davis here. The outside corners for Cincinnati have have been outstanding. Ever since they made the move away from Chidobe Awuzie, he's now a part-time player for the Bengals and went to DJ Turner. DJ Turner is allowing a 41% catch rate, 50 passer rating in his coverage, and Cam Taylor-Britt has given him a run for his money on the other side. 55% catch rate, 76 passer rating allowed in his coverage. These guys have been absolutely fantastic. Now, is there a path, considering the way that you beat Cincinnati, play action, things like that? Is there a path for Gabriel Davis? Because the man had a 50% target share on play action passes last week, and we saw how he did. It's there, but these outside corners for Cincinnati are fantastic. If I've got other options in that same type of realm in the rankings or flex-wise, I'm going with them over Gabriel Davis.
Is Davis the type of guy that you want to just say start him every week, knowing you don't want to miss out on the boom weeks, even if you're going to have to kind of swallow the bust weeks?
Yeah, I mean, that's really where he's at now. I mean, he's the downfield, field stretching guy for Buffalo, and tied to Josh Allen's arm, which we haven't even talked about. He's dealing with a shoulder injury. So do they run more in this matchup? Because they can. You can run on Cincinnati. But I think the bigger point about Gabriel Davis is, yes, it's kind of like, I'm not going to put so much the onus, but the same reason why you start George Kittle every single week. I'm not saying that they're in the same tier, but you deal with the 30 receiving yard games for George Kittle because you know also it's in his bag to get 150 one week and win you the week. So same thing for Gabriel Davis.
Erickson, who's your next wide receiver on this list?
Jakobi Meyers. Don't want to play Jakobi Meyers. We saw his worst game of the season, actually, besides last Monday night, which was technically his worst game of the season. His other worst game of the season came with Aiden O'Connell drawing the start against the Chargers. Jakobi Meyers was not as involved. I'm really interested to see how Meyers' role changes or is different without Josh McDaniels, because Josh McDaniels was the guy that brought him there. Like, he's one of these ex-Patriots players that McDaniels brought in. McDaniels obviously out as the head coach. So how is this going to, what's the trickle-down effect going to be? Like, do they go back to Hunter Renfrow? Hunter Renfrow played more than he's ever played last week, and they didn't trade him. So, and they're paying for Renfrow a lot of money, too. So does he get more involved? Does the target share spread out a little bit more? It's not so concentrated on just Jakobi Meyers and DeVonta Adams. And, I mean, if Adams doesn't get, 15 targets from Aiden O'Connell, which I think that he can go in the huddle and just demand Aiden O'Connell throw him the ball on every single play, and he's like, I'm not going to argue with this guy. I'm just going to throw it to him. That has me concerned about Meyers. Again, such a hot start for Jakobi Meyers, but we may see some regression kind of kick in here where he's not as heavily targeted with all the changes happening in the Raiders offense. I would really like to see it first to see, okay, his role hasn't changed. So even though the matchup is pretty good on paper, I think it's okay to shy away from Jakobi Meyers this week.
Are you expecting a general, that first week with the interim coach, you oftentimes see a bump from teams, even if it doesn't specifically apply to Myers? Do you think we will see that for other guys in this Raiders offense?
I mean, probably Adams is the only guy that comes to mind, to be totally honest, because he was so open on so many of those plays against the Lions, and just Jimmy Garoppolo kept just airballing him left and right. And I really think that Aiden O'Connell is going to just hyper target Adams, because all we can practice is going to be give me the ball. And if you're a rookie, what are you supposed to do? Look elsewhere? It's no, he's going to throw the ball to Adams, and Adams has shown he's going to get 20 targets. He's going to deliver more often than not. So, I mean, Jacobs has been just bad anyway as a running back, in efficiency. So I don't really see why that would change. The run blocking scheme's not going to get that much different. So I think for the most part, it's probably just Adams, and the Raiders offense, I think, will probably just be lackluster overall because Aiden O'Connell's really, not that special.
DBro, who's your next must-sit receiver?
Going, again, I get people are probably going to have to start him anyway, and I understand that. But DeVonta Smith, I know he's coming off a big game. But again, going to the matchup, Dallas has allowed the third lowest PPR points per target this season to perimeter wide receivers. Their outside corners are playing amazing, fantastic football. Deron Bland, 22 pass rating. And yes, you heard me right. 22.6 passer rating in his coverage allowed. Stephon Gilmore is still that guy. 74 passer rating in his coverage. So, again, with play action, and this is how you beat the Dallas Cowboys secondary, there is an avenue for DeVonta Smith to walk away with a good game. But if you can sit him, if you're stacked at wide receiver, if you've got other options, I would say you need to consider sitting him this week because the matchup is horrendous. And we could see, I mean, there's no stopping A.J. Brown. Nobody can stop. The only person that can stop A.J. Brown is A.J. Brown at this point. And I think we could see a lot of running out of the Philadelphia Eagles because the Cowboys, you can get over on their run defense.
Do you think fantasy managers who have been waiting for the DeVonta Smith breakout game since week 2, to finally follow that up, are going to be willing to sit him coming off of actually having a really good game?
Hold on.
Like, just like the mental side of fantasy, like, I feel like managers, if they're like just begging to get somebody like, please, this is a stud, I've been just waiting for him in my lineup, and he finally hits it, they're not likely to sit him the next game, right?
No, they're probably not likely to sit him, and I understand that. I really do get that, but this matchup is horrendous. And if we were to have this same conversation last week before the big game for DeVonta Smith, I think people would be more in tune and being like, okay, fine, I'm going to sit him. But now that they've seen a bigger or a bounce back game from DeVonta Smith, they're more likely to chase that as opposed to being like, well, it's been all A.J. Brown. When's that going to ever happen? Oh, it's a tough matchup? Okay, I need to probably sit him.
Erickson, give me your last must-sit receiver.
Jaxon Smith-Njigba, rookie wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. I don't love the matchup against the Ravens. 5th fewest fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers. And they play more man coverage than zone coverage, which is similar to what the Browns do on offense. So, and last week, what did we see from JSN? 4 targets. Like, he didn't get a lot of targets in that particular matchup. It was DK Metcalf, who, again, going back to the splits of man versus zone, like DK Metcalf is the guy they always go to in man. And I know Lockett had a pretty good game too, but as the guy that they use in the slot the most, like, JSN wants to face defenses that are playing zone. Like, that's where he's going to see more favorable looks, not necessarily against a defense that plays more man coverage like the Browns last week and like the Ravens this week. So if JSN hadn't caught a touchdown like last week, then he would have been a bust last week. So he wouldn't have done a lot for your lineup. So I know he's caught touchdowns in back-to-back weeks, but one of those games Metcalf missed entirely. Metcalf was still more involved. He was third in terms, again, not a lot of targets last week against the man coverage defense. And so I think JSN's been running hot with the scoring. I don't know if he's going to find the end zone this week. So I think that he's okay to sit, even though he's had 2 productive weeks back-to-back.
I'm totally with you on this one, Erickson. By the way, JSN, it makes me so furious. They tossed him right back into this no A-dot role. His A-dot last week, 0.8. Why? Just why, Shane Waldron?
And they keep using Jake Bobo, and they have this obsession with Jake Bobo around the end zone for some reason.
I don't understand it. You show that you have the ability, you have the know-how to use JSN down the field. Give him an A-dot. Nah. Well, we could just throw him pop passes, like, right at the line of scrimmage. We have to, right? It's frustrating.
I'm with you on JSN this week. This is maybe a larger philosophical discussion for an off-season episode, maybe. But you said something there, Erickson, about JSN, if he didn't catch a touchdown, would have busted the last couple of weeks. Isn't that true for most receivers? Like, the number of guys who don't need a touchdown in order to have a good fantasy week is pretty small, right? Like, it's kind of at the end of the day all about touchdowns, right?
Not in full PPR. I mean, ask anyone that owns Deontay Johnson. Like, there's a reason why there are certain players that you can draft in certain formats over other players. And touchdowns are the most fluky statistic, left and right, or when you basically look at the season in totality, like, that's something that's super fluky. His touchdown variance is very, very real. So it's like when a guy is running so hot on touchdowns, when it's like this guy is catching all of his red zone targets for touchdowns, eventually it's going to regress and not in a way that you want versus other players who this guy's getting so many red zone targets, he's never scoring any week. Eventually he's going to find the end zone. And those are things you want to catch before they happen. Like Chris Godwin scored last week after seeing the most red zone targets. DeAndre Hopkins, he had 0 touchdowns and then broke out for 3 touchdowns despite having the most red zone targets on the Tennessee Titans, in that matchup for the Tennessee Titans. So for me, it's like, touchdowns are very fluky. So it's something that if you guys are running hot with them, it's like, hey, this is going to regress, so I need to get ahead of it sooner rather than later.
Side note, how bad do you think Twitter will melt down, or just our collective consciousness will melt down if Deontay Johnson goes an entire season, the rest of the season, without catching another touchdown? Like, I don't know how to process
I don't know when people are listening to this, but he's scoring. He's going to score this week.
Okay.
Deontay Johnson.
Okay. I hope for all of our sanity that you're right, Erickson. I really do.
I'm putting my money on it. The anytime touchdown, it's happening for Deontay Johnson. I'm putting my money on it.
It's got to be up to what? Plus 400, plus 2,000?
No, it's actually really like not that long of odds, honestly. I was like,
because the odds makers are like, well, it's got to happen sometime, baby.
They know about the regression. They know it's happening. So,
All right, let's go to the last must-sit receiver here, DBro.
Oy. All right. Well, keep talking about all these guys that people are going to have to start. I get it if you got to start DJ Moore, but you need to temper expectations, man. This matchup is horrendous for DJ Moore. The perimeter wide receivers versus the New Orleans Saints have had the lowest PPR points per target and the lowest receiving yards per game. Marshawn Lattimore and Paulson Adebo have been fantastic. Marshawn Lattimore, 76 passer rating in his coverage. Paulson Adebo, 43 passer rating in his coverage. I think I'm not going to be crazy here, and this is just a hot take, obviously, but I think if you want a wide receiver to start for Chicago with the matchup and such, Darnell Mooney might finish up with a better day than DJ Moore this week, which is crazy to say. But these outside corners for the Saints have been playing out of their minds lately. So if you can, sit DJ Moore.
Worth noting, since that huge blow-up game on Thursday night against the Commanders, he has not reached double-digit scoring in half PPR in any game since then. So he has been somewhat cold since that huge blow-up game. But like you said, again, with the buys going on, probably most people are in a position where they're going to need to start him, but we'll be good to temper expectations. Erickson, here's our who do I start? Terry McLaurin or, and this name's going to sound crazy, but they're actually back-to-back in the consensus rankings, Terry McLaurin or Puka Nacua.
I'm starting Puka Nacua.
All right. They're like I said, they are back-to-back. They're 17th and 18th in ECR. DBro, are you also you're not overthinking it? You're sticking with Puka?
Worm, do you think you're really going to get me on air on a show to say to sit Puka Nacua? Is that where we're going? Do you think I'm really going to say that?
Questions.
No, I'm not.
Just asking questions here.
I'm not going to do that. Not doing that to my mans. Never.
All right, Erickson. Jakobi Meyers or Tyler Lockett?
I mean, I guess Lockett. I don't really love either guy necessarily, but I'll take Lockett, who's just, I think, maybe a little more. I mean, he has got Geno Smith. Like, he's got the better quarterback, so I'll just go Lockett.
And speaking of Geno Smith, how about JSN or Jahan Dotson this week?
See, this is a good one. This is a good one you brought to the table because Dotson has just been so bad all year. But last week, he was better. And the week before, he did see a decent amount of targets. And I wrote him off in the fantasy forecast basically because I dropped him and I was like so disappointed with how he's done all season. I was like, avoid this guy. If he got dropped, don't pick him up. Then I thought about it more and I was like, Patriots are really good against number one receivers, not that good against number two receivers. And the fact that his boosted production last week coincided with Curtis Samuel being hurt, I don't think that's nothing. So I thought about it a little bit more. I was like, you know what? Dude, Dotson might actually be in a decent spot here. I know we all kind of wrote him off after such a slow start, but if he's going to see the most targets in this offense, which he has at points this season, he has a full-time role. I think I'm going to roll with Jahan Dotson here.
Quickly, DBro, who do you like at that side, JSN or Dotson?
I'm going to go JSN, and this leans to, and I wrote this up in the primer, Dotson has disappeared versus man coverage. That man doesn't even have a 12% target share versus man coverage. So I just feel like we're chasing here, and then the Patriots man coverage, I just think Dotson's going to get wiped off the board. So give me JSN. As much as I don't want to chase 0.8 ADOT at all, if I got to go between the two guys, I'll take JSN.
All right, DBro, some for you as well here. Gabe Davis or George Pickens this week?
Give me Gabe Davis. I'll take the guy in the high total in the shootout over George Pickens, who's going to catch passes from a less than fully healthy Kenny Pickett.
DeVonta Smith or Chris Olave?
Oh, I'm going to Chris Olave. I think that this is the regression, the big game that we've been waiting for Chris Olave. And I know we can easily say that every week, but I just look. If the ball doesn't bounce off of his helmet, he's got to catch it, right? It's got to eventually happen, guys, huh? Come on.
How about DJ Moore or Terry McLaurin?
I'm going to go with Terry here. I'm higher on Terry this week. Now, Erickson, I'm kind of curious. Where do you have Terry McLaurin ranked right now? Because I'm higher on him. He is the guy to beat man coverage. If there's anybody on this Commanders roster that can beat man coverage, their passing offense is going to have to flow through Terry McLaurin. And I understand the concerns about number one wide receivers versus the Patriots, but I'm going McLaurin here. Where do you have him ranked?
I mean, he's a wide receiver 2. He's a wide receiver 2 every single week because that's what he always does. It's like
I got him at wide
it's like
receiver
one of these
17
things where
so.
he's gonna probably give you a decent floor, but the Patriots also know like that he's clearly their best wide receiver, so they're gonna try to sell out to stop him and let the other Commanders players try to beat their defense because that's just what Bill Belichick does, and it's been pretty successful this season in particular.
DBro, just throw one more your way. Jamar Chase or Puka Nacua?
I'm sorry, we must have a connection problem. I didn't hear you, Worm. Excuse me. We'll just have to keep moving on with the show. I'm sorry, I didn't get that question. My bad.
Even in the most obvious one, you still won't say it out loud. I respect your conviction.
Nope.
We will move on here.
It's a connection, man. It's the internet. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. I'm not Fitz here with the connection issues. Must say quarterback, tight end, and defense/special teams. Erickson, who you got?
All right, I've talked about the Commanders, pass catchers with McLaurin, Sam Howell. I just think that he's a super matchup dependent quarterback. Saw him do excellent, QB1 overall, I believe, last week against the Eagles. He's been great against the Eagles, great against the Broncos, but we've seen him also be really bad against the Bills, Bears, and Giants. And I just think that an inexperienced quarterback playing on the road at Gillette Stadium against the Patriots is just not a good spot. I think this is where we're going to see a down game from Sam Howell. So I'm going to sit him. Trey McBride. I came on the show last week, said to sit Trey McBride, and he absolutely threw it in my face after seeing 14 targets, scoring a touchdown, that he willed his way into the end zone. But I'm going to double down here because I hate the matchup. Browns are the number 1 team against tight ends. And again, Trey McBride had all of his production in garbage time. That's not going to sustain week over week. And you can say, oh, well, it's the Cardinals, Andrew. Like, they're always in garbage time. It's like, yeah, well, some defenses don't just let the other team throw the ball against them. And the fact that it's the Browns starting PJ Walker, I don't know if they're just going to jump out to this like massive lead, even if it's against Clayton Tune. And that's the other factor here, a brand new quarterback. Like, what's the target share going to be like for tight ends? So I think there's just enough question marks about Trey McBride. I know that 14 targets looked so great last week, but look, Zach Ertz had a lot of games with a lot of targets too. In the next weeks, they didn't always carry over. So I would be concerned about McBride, especially in the worst matchup you could ask for a tight end. And then DST, bench the Buccaneers. Look, I know CJ Stroud's a rookie quarterback, but he doesn't turn the ball over. Like, he doesn't get sacked. He doesn't throw interceptions. And that's what you need when you start a DST in fantasy. So I'm going to sit the Buccaneers.
Sam Howell or Gardner Minshew this week?
I would probably start Minshew, I think.
All right,
DBro,
take us home.
super confident about that, Erickson.
They're both bad. Like, I really don't want to play either of them. I'd
rather
play Bryce Young.
Ugly out there. Yep.
I'd rather play Bryce Young than both of them.
Really?
All right.
I would take the mustache. Give me the mustache.
DBro, give me your last players here.
Oh, I don't want any part of Taylor Heineke. I was going to come on here and tell you to sit Desmond Ridder anyway, but apparently Arthur Smith beat me to that. So now I'm just going to tell you to sit Taylor Heineke. This matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings, they're blitzing at the highest rate in the NFL. So Taylor Heineke, we've seen him be very up and down versus pressure in the past. So I'm not going to tell you that Taylor Heineke is going to be good versus pressure, especially when they're bringing the blitz at the highest rate. And plus, the other part about this is since week 5, this secondary has been playing better. People don't want to give it credit, but it's true. Since week 5, Minnesota is allowing the 11th lowest yards per attempt, the 12th lowest pass rating, and the 12th fewest fantasy points per game to passing. So Taylor Heineke, sorry, Arthur. Don't want any part of him. And as far as tight ends, Dalton Schultz. Tampa Bay has been fantastic versus as far as defending tight ends. 4th in DVOA, allowing the 9th lowest yards per reception to tight ends. So I understand we're on buys and tight end options are scarce right now, but Dalton Schultz is not a guy that I want to be plugging into lineups. And as far as the defense, Buffalo Bills. They have not. The only reason people want to start the Buffalo Bills is name cachet. That is it. Their pressure rate has been good, but I'm telling you, baby, Joe Shiesty, Joe Cool, Joe Burrow is back. He is back. What he did last week versus the 49ers should tell everybody. That man was amazing. He had 10 passing attempts when he was pressured last week, completed all of them. Completed all of them for over 13 yards per attempt. Plus added the 40 rushing yards. Do not play the Buffalo Bills versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow is going to light them on fire.
Quickly, DBro, Dalton Schultz or Logan Thomas this week?
I'm going to go Logan Thomas. We've just seen the consistent floor, and the Commanders cannot run the ball to save their lives. So we know they are going to throw. That's the only thing we can count on with Sam Howell. He's going to throw the ball every single week. I can't tell you it's going to be good, it's going to be pretty, or things are going to happen or not. But they're going to throw the ball all the time.
Recapping here, all the guys we are sitting: Gus Edwards, Rhamondre Stevenson, Dameon Pierce, Rachaad White, Roschon Johnson, Brian Robinson, Terry McLaurin, Gabe Davis, Jakobi Meyers, DeVonta Smith, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, DJ Moore, Sam Howell, Trey McBride, the Bucs defense, Taylor Heineke, Dalton Schultz, and the Bills defense for Erickson and DBro. I am Ryan Wormeli. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time.